Up next, I would like to welcome Jack from Sensor Tower, who's going to be talking about opportunities and challenges in mobile gaming. So welcome, Jack.
Thanks, John. Oh. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Awesome. Excellent. My name is Jack. As Charlie mentioned, I lead the team that looks after Sensor Tower's gaming customers across the EMEA region. Many of you probably know Sensor Tower, many of you are probably customers of Sensor Tower, but just a quick recap. Our core business is market intelligence and competitor analysis in the mobile app ecosystem. But our goal is to measure the world's digital economy, which means going beyond mobile, and I've got a few data points beyond mobile today that I'll go through as well. But in terms of today, we'll be looking at year-on-year trends, some themes that shape 2024, a few expectations for 2025, and hopefully give you a few reasons to be optimistic. One thing for the guys at the back, do you mind just expanding the size of the speaker notes just there, if that's okay? Just bring it up a bit. Perfect, thank you very much. Right, let's get into it. So what themes shaped 2024? Well, firstly, we continue to see a boom in non-gaming apps, especially in terms of time spent versus gaming. Post-pandemic, people started going back outside. How dare they? So demand for apps that connected them back to reality, back to the real world, such as health and fitness and social media apps, they saw a big, big boom. Secondly, post-pandemic, post-Apple introducing app tracking transparency, we've seen much more focus on efficiency of spend, less focus on launching costly new titles, extra focus on publishers on their existing titles, making better use of live ops and in-app events. And as you'll see in some of the data, legacy titles were actually the #1 driver of revenue growth in 2024. And then thirdly, we've seen more of a shift away from just performance marketing, app install growth marketing, towards better use of brand marketing and using IP and transmedia specifically to find and expand new audiences in a more cost-effective way. So you'll see these pop up over the next few slides, but let's start high level. So I don't need to tell you it's been a tough couple of years after the boom of COVID. I will give you some reasons to be optimistic, but not just yet. In terms of downloads, we've seen this year-on-year decline. On the left, we've got gaming and non-gaming apps 1% down, and on the right, we've got gaming only 6.5% down. I'm afraid the situation is even worse. But 136 billion, 49 billion downloads are still very large numbers. The app stores are still driving huge consumer demand. But in both instances, as you can see in blue there, the Google Play Store is what drove that decline. So Apple was still relatively stable for downloads despite them introducing ATT. So what is one of the main reasons for this download decline in gaming? Well, the simple answer is casual games, which was 16% down year on year in 2024. So since Apple introduced ATT, cost per installs have gone up. Some have been calling it the death of hyper-casual games. Our data obviously doesn't suggest that. Last year, hyper-casual downloads only declined by 2%, and their relative download market share actually went up. So I'll talk about hybrid casual and mid-core in the next slide, but you can see their downloads saw a little bit of growth last year. But overall, the takeaway is primarily casual game developers were the ones that were doing less to find new players and drive up those installs. However, this doesn't quite paint the entire picture. Because then if we look at revenue, and this is in-app revenue, consumer spend in-app, for revenue growth, casual games were the main driver behind that growth. So looking at this data, it suggests higher CPIs are driving two big changes in gaming. So firstly, casual game developers in particular are focusing less on finding new players, more on improving that lifetime value. Monopoly Go is one example of a casual game success in 2024 and 2023. And hybrid casual is obviously growing rapidly. So this is where some developers are moving away from hyper-casual games and finding that sweet spot in hybrid casual, so with less emphasis on ad revenue. So recent successful games in the hybrid casual space include Screw Jam and Match Factory from Zynga and Triple Match from Miniclip. So you can see mid-core, the market has been shrinking, but it's still over half of the market spend. So there's still appetite for games that are not casual by nature. So hopefully you can see all these numbers, the growth markets there are showing, hinting at my next slide, the fact that we've got another reason, or our first reason to be optimistic, and that is that revenue is up. So downloads are down, but revenue is up. So $150 billion in apps and games and $82 billion in gaming. Very big numbers again. On the right-hand side for gaming, you can see all that revenue growth has been driven by the Apple App Store. And so why is this? Well, relative stagnation across Asia, as we'll see later, where Google Play is dominant, whereas the US and Europe, where the Apple App Store tends to be have greater presence, has had a much stronger year there. But then if we look at the left-hand side, so gaming and non-gaming, you can see they've outperformed games in terms of revenue growth, and that links back to that first theme that I mentioned, which is that strong competition for time versus non-gaming apps. So let's just quickly look at non-gaming in a little more detail. So it's sometimes said that a game developer's largest competitor is not necessarily other games, but it's the other ways their players spend their time. Well, this is how things looked across the app ecosystem. On the left there, you can see that's percentage change in time spent for the main App Store categories. That starting point there is about 3 to 6 months after the end of COVID, when time spent in gaming was the lowest it has been in recent years. And so we can see, firstly in 2023 for gaming, that kind of dark blue line there. In 2023, that growth was not massive, about 10 to 15% in that first year. But then we saw a huge uplift in 2024 as that accelerated to about a 60% increase from the previous low. And that then moves into my second reason to be optimistic, and the chart on the right-hand side there. For the last 12 months, we've seen that gaming has accelerated in terms of total time spent much faster than for non-gaming in 2024. So that's second reason to be optimistic going into 2025. So let's have a look at how the data links to that second theme that I mentioned, that publishers are launching less and focusing more on their existing titles. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Hopefully it's pretty clear. This chart shows that decline. You can see puzzle is pretty much the only genre to release more in 2024. But it does seem that this is starting to level out now, so we might get to a happy medium. But publishers are launching less. So why is this happening? Well, this is why. You can see in the blue there, apps launched 5 years ago versus apps launched in that same year, how much revenue they're making in those years. So you can see legacy apps have absolutely dominated the last few years, and new apps are really struggling to break through. And publishers have learned that they can earn more money on their existing titles. CPIs are still high, so acquiring new users is still less attractive. And they're now tending to focus on taking something good and refining it, driving up that lifetime value, driving up that retention as well. So in fact, and it's not on here, games that launched in 2024 actually earned as much as games launched in 2016 in their same launch year, despite the overall market nearly tripling in size for revenue. So, and as you can see, that difference does seem to be plateauing now, but the difference is still very quite stark. And we do expect that dominance by legacy apps to continue into the future. And then this is reinforced by the publisher landscape. So this is worldwide consumer spend in 2024. So apologies, I know there's a lot of data here. And you can see market concentration by publisher. So what is clear is the complete dominance and lack of competition across most genres in the market. You can see most genres have about a third of their global revenue taken by just 2 publishers. If we look at a few of them, RPG at the top there is by far the most competitive. 57% of spend came from outside the top 10 publishers. Whereas if we look down at the other end, shooter, for example, more than 50% came from just 1 publisher, all going to Tencent. And the top publishers in shooter controlled almost 90% of that entire market. Geolocation, even more extreme example, utter dominance by Niantic with Pokemon Go and Monster Hunter now. And in terms of a trend, we're seeing most genres are actually becoming more entrenched. They're becoming more dominated by these top game publishers in recent years. However, not all is lost. Puzzle is a great example of the fact that lack of competition means that things can be ripe for disruption, as shown in Puzzle in the last few years, with Royal Match coming to dethrone Candy Crush in the last couple of years in that space. So I've mentioned a few different regional performances, so let's just dive into that in a little more detail. So this is market share of consumer spend by genre and subgenre in 2024. So I'll go into each region in more details in the next 3 slides, but I thought it'd just be interesting to see kind of the whole landscape here, how they all compare. And the most obvious difference is this utter dominance in Asia for RPG mobile games. Whereas North America and Europe, you can see for the top 6 there, apart from casino and strategy, which you could swap around, the top 6 are more or less the same in terms of size and scale. But Asia, one key cultural difference that we see is that whereas in the West, in North America and Europe, gamers tend to socialize via kind of PC and console titles, whereas across Asia, much more of the social gaming happens via these RPG games on mobile. So let's just dive into each one quickly. So North America, again, on the left is consumer spend for the last 12 months. These legacy categories of casino and puzzle are still dominating, almost half of the total spend there, and they tend to also have the most competition. On the right there, you can see the year-on-year growth for each. And so in terms of kind of what's driving this, so if we look at casino, 16% up year-on-year, mainly driven by Monopoly Go. Scopely's Coin Looter set a number of records. It was the biggest launch ever in April 2023. In mobile gaming, it took just 473 days to reach $3 billion consumer spending, which is the fastest ever. So that's what's been driving that huge growth there. If we look at puzzle, 13%, mainly driven by one game again, Royal Match, released in 2021 by Dream Games. They took the top spot from Candy Crush this year and is now the #2 title globally. And then strategy games, 17% up, again, mainly driven by one game, Last War Survival, released in 2023 by First Fun, which is a Singaporean-based developer. They've seen rapid growth and now taking a top 5 spot globally. You've probably seen some of their creatives online with Anthony Starr, who plays Homelander in The Boys. So yeah, it's interesting how it's really just specific apps, specific games in each genre that are driving that growth. And then one last thing to point out, RPG, double-digit decline in North America. This is the only genre that declined across the board, across each region, as we'll see. So quickly for Europe, it was a very good year for Europe. Like I say, RPG was the only one that actually declined. Growth in consumer spend for every other genre. And in terms of top games, it is a very similar story to North America. This time, strategy takes the top spot, again driven by Last War, then puzzle, again driven by Royal Match, and casino, again, driven by Monopoly Go. But I mean, one key point here is Europe tends to get lumped in with North America when it comes to developers focusing on the West. But hopefully this shows that Europe has had quite a different year, much more growth across all the different categories. And so there's definitely lots of money to be had, lots of reasons to localize your approach in Europe. And so lastly, let's look at Asia. So obviously very mixed results. If we start at RPG, still dominating, but massive 19% decline there. And if we look at the games that are driving that, MiHoYo's 2 large RPGs, Honkai Star Rail and Genshin Impact, they're still dominating, but seeing huge amounts of revenue decline. Genshin Impact, almost 50% down year on year in terms of revenue. But we can see across the board clear opportunities as gaming preferences are shifting. We're seeing double-digit growth in action, puzzle, and lifestyle. If we look at action, 74% growth, massive growth, mainly driven by, again, one game, Tencent's Dungeon Fighter Mobile, a game which launched in China in May. That's been a big boost to Tencent that I've seen declining revenues across their other titles. Puzzle, 11% up year on year, again, mainly driven by Royal Match, which saw 100% year on year revenue growth in the region. Japan is actually now Royal Match's #2 market globally for revenue, which I was quite surprised to see. So what's the main takeaway here? Well, if you're going to take away one thing, it's that there is a fast-growing market for casual games in Asia. Historically, that wasn't the case. Historically, it was dominant by RPG, but things are shifting quite quickly. So this is my last section here, focusing on that final theme of how the marketing landscape has been changing as brands and games are looking for a more cost-effective way to reach new audiences. But firstly, where do you start when each game has a completely different kind of audience type? Well, as you can see, you've got in puzzle, it tends to attract women and older players who spend more time in shopping apps. Strategy games tend to attract men and younger audiences who are spending more time using fast food apps. So our gaming and brand customers are now using this data to better understand who to partner with and where to place their ads. But beyond just placing ads in the right places, in 2024, we saw some great examples of big brands and big gaming companies using their IP and using transmedia strategies to expand their audiences even further in a more cost-effective way. So in terms of using pre-existing IP, I've already mentioned some success stories, Monopoly Go in the casino genre in the US and Europe, Dungeon Fighter Mobile in China, which was a massive South Korean game IP, and very recently Pokemon trading card game Pocket, which released, 2 weeks into its release had already recorded $90 million in worldwide consumer spend. So those are some great examples of kind of using IP in gaming. But let's look more specifically at collaboration across brands and gaming. and how they can be rocket fuel. So this is just a very, very specific example looking at Brawl Stars. This is Brawl Stars' worldwide weekly revenue. And they hit their all-time largest day of revenue the day after the SpongeBob SquarePants event began on the 5th of September. So for context, August 2024 to September 2024, they saw a 60% download increase, mainly driven by this. If you compare that to the year before, they only saw an 8% increase in that same period of time. And you might have seen some of these creatives yourself, leveraging two massive, massive well-known brands, John Cena and SpongeBob. They were all over the internet. This is obviously a very, very strong example of getting everything right and combining two big brands. But Brawl Stars keep doing this, they keep leveraging IP in this way, and it's helped them have their largest year ever in terms of revenue. Other collaborations they've done include Paper Mario, Godzilla, South Park, Splatoon, Powerpuff Girls, and they just keep going. And so we only see this happening more and more, and we expect other game developers to follow as they see the success of people like Brawl Stars. So just one last example, and how about transmedia then? So this year we've seen a couple of great examples, the Fallout TV show being one of them, but I was just going to speak about Arcane and League of Legends. So in November, Netflix released Arcane Season 2 based on the League of Legends universe. If you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend Arcane Season 1 and 2, they're a fantastic show. But you can see what the release of the show did in terms of the impact on their mobile game Wild Rift. So on the left, we've got weekly downloads, and on the right, we've got daily revenue, both worldwide. And we saw very similar spikes for their mobile card strategy game, Legends of Runeterra. And then beyond the show, to further capitalize on this, both games have been running in-app, in-game events related to the show, and also the show's release was timed just after, 1 week after the League of Legends World Final to capture that momentum. So really amazing work from Riot Games here to make good use of transmedia. So what do we expect in 2025? Well, firstly, we are expecting a strong return to growth, which is obviously good news. However, and the controversial take here is that we expect the biggest winners will be those largest publishers who already dominate their genres with those and those well-established evergreen games, as long as they do a good job of building on those audiences on using IP, transmedia, and other things that I mentioned. Secondly, we expect smaller developers will likely look cross-platform more as they realize they can't necessarily take revenue away from those larger titles. For example, putting their games on Steam, doing more direct-to-consumer, using web stores. And then lastly, it is still hard to do marketing in a post-ATT environment. So having those pre-established IPs and finding a new audience in cost-effective ways is going to be the way that you win in the market. And that is it from me. Thank you very much.